most people with gallstones are actually surprised to find out that it is their dietary patterns that probably contributed to the development of gallstones. So in this video, I'm going to talk about two main ways that our diet can contribute to the development of gallstones. Gallstones, of course, are quite a common problem. I think many of us would know at least one person personally who has gallstones. Gallstones affect about 10 to 15% of the United States population, and every year many of these people actually end up in emergency rooms because of complications from these gallstones, and oftentimes it requires surgery. So this is a pretty serious problem and unfortunately a common problem. So let's dive right into the two main dietary factors that contributes to the development of gallstones. Now, the first one is having too little fat in the diet. Now, over the past couple of decades, fat has been vilified. It's been, put out there that fat in the diet is the cause of plaques and blockages in arteries and heart attacks and things like that. But we know now that fat is not the bad guy, right? If anything, it's the sort of highly processed vegetable and seed oils, but naturally occurring fat in foods such as eggs and whole milk and other dairy and so on is not to be feared. Now, the thing about fat in the diet is that when we have fat in the diet, it requires bile for digestion. Fat doesn't mix with water, so in order for the fat to be able to be transported through the intestinal walls so it can go into the blood, which is water-based, it needs to be coated, right? So it's coated by the fat globules are coated by these bile acids, and when these globules of fat get coated by the bile acids like that, then they can be absorbed through the intestinal wall and into the bloodstream. Now, if we're not eating a lot, if our meal is kind of limited, if our meals are limited when it comes to fat, it means that we're not going to need as much of the bile. And so therefore the bile, which is stored in the gallbladder, the gallbladder won't be contracting to release the bile because it would not get the signal from the intestines, the signal from the gut that, oh, bile is needed, there's fat on the way, right? And so when you're not using the bile, the gallbladder is not contracting, so you have stasis developing of the bile fluid that's in the gallbladder. And whenever there's stasis, it means that the bile gets a bit concentrated, and what happens first is that sludge starts to form, like a sediment. And as the stasis continues, because the diet is just so lacking in fat, eventually you can actually have the sludge clumping together and forming gallstones. Now, the thing with gallstones, yes, a lot of gallstones are actually asymptomatic, and most people, well, not most, I say a lot of people find out incidentally that they have gallstones when they've had an ultrasound for some other reason. But some people have major problems with gallstones because they can move. So when the gallbladder does contract, sometimes it can actually push the gallstones out, and then the gallstones can go into the bile duct and block it. Depending on the size, it can block the bile duct, and when there's blockage, it means that whenever the gallbladder contracts again to release more bile, there's obstruction, but more bile is coming into the gallbladder from the liver, and so you get a situation where it becomes sort of stretched, distended as we say, and then it can actually get infected because again you have stasis there. It gets infected and you get an acute gallbladder attack, and that of course is a surgical emergency oftentimes. Now so that is really the mechanism for a low-fat diet causing or increasing the chance or likelihood of the formation of stones. Now, the other dietary factor that contributes to the development of gallstones is, guess what? Eating too much sugar. Now, you might think that that is quite strange. Like sugar and fat, they're just such different nutrients, so to speak, right? Sugar's not really a nutrient, but anyway, there's such different compounds. So like, how on earth can sugar cause gallstones, right? Because gallstones are not necessary for the digestion of sugar, right? Now, the thing with excess dietary sugar is that this excess sugar, of course, it gets absorbed into the blood as glucose. And when you have large amounts of glucose that you're not able to utilize, that glucose actually gets converted to cholesterol, fat of all things, right? Triglyceride, which is a bad type of cholesterol. Fructose is another type of sugar, and fructose definitely also gets converted to fat in the liver. Now, a lot of this fat that the sugar is converted to is stored in the liver, and that's how you get fatty liver. Some of the fat, the cholesterol, gets transported into the bloodstream, and some of it actually gets transported into the gallbladder, where it is, stored, I guess, with the bile. So you have bile fluid that is very fatty, very cholesterol rich. Now, the more sugar you eat, of course, and if you're not, burning it off with exercise and so on, then it means that you have more of the sugar being converted into fat and more of it going into the liver, into the bloodstream, and then into the gallbladder. The higher the concentration, it means that, again, it can sort of coalesce, and eventually you can actually have cholesterol stones forming, cholesterol gallstones. And the same problem again is that the stones can get into the duct, block it off. Sometimes the stones can actually get into the pancreas, and you can actually get pancreatitis, which is an infectious sudden inflammation and sometimes infection of the pancreas because of gallstones. So those are two ways that the diet can contribute to the development of stones. One is too little fat, so you're just not needing as much bile, and staying in the gallbladder, being stagnant, getting thickened and just forming stones. And then the second way is having too much sugar, and that excess sugar gets converted into fat, and some of that fat or cholesterol gets stored in the gallbladder. When you're eating a lot of sugar and you're having all these cholesterol stones, and then at the same time you're not having a lot of dietary fat, because oftentimes in these fat-free foods they take out the fat, but to make the food palatable they add a lot of sugar. So it's like a double whammy. So you have all this cholesterol rich bile in the gallbladder, but then you're not eating any dietary fat, so the gallbladder is not contracting to get that bile out. Because often if you're eating a lot of fat, then the gallbladder can work and get that cholesterol rich bile out into the intestines, and you don't have to get stones. But sometimes if it's just really overburdened, then you have the stones forming. So what can you do about this? Well, if you think about the mechanisms, and you can sort of figure it out. The first is to not fear fat. I like to say that you should not fear naturally fatty foods. So foods that naturally in nature are fat-free. We're talking avocado, olives, and olive oil by extension, coconuts, eggs, whole egg, nuts, seeds, including flax seeds and all these pumpkin seeds, all these fatty foods. We should not fear naturally fatty foods. Instead, you should fear unnaturally fat-free foods. Now, our diets, the recommended allowance is really that our diet should have about a third of our food intake should be from fat, or they say caloric. A third of our caloric intake should be from fat. So you can just kind of use the general rule of thumb, which varies, of course, depending on what you're doing and day to day and availability and so on. But you can say a third of your plate as fat, a third as protein, and a third as carbohydrates. Now, the carbohydrates, I generally suggest you can have the carbohydrates be mostly vegetables. Vegetables are carbs, vegetables are starch, but it's just that a lot of that starch is indigestible starch because it's fiber, right? So if you can use the rule of thirds, a third, fat, protein, carbohydrates, then that's generally okay. So incorporate healthy fats in your diet, right? Naturally occurring fatty foods. And then the second thing is to limit your added sugar intake. Now, we can survive without sugar because our liver can actually make sugar if we need it, right? Or whenever we need it. But if you are going to have added sugar, you should try to let that be no more than 24 grams in a day. 24 grams is the same as 6 teaspoons because every 4 grams is equal to 1 teaspoon of sugar. And so thinking about it in teaspoons sort of makes you appreciate how much you're having. So the recommended daily allowance of sugar is no more than 24 grams or 6 teaspoons. And if you can use these general guidelines when you're thinking about the types of foods you're going to eat, generally speaking, that should decrease your chance or decrease your risk for getting gallstones in the future. And doing that as well could, because if you start eating better and you have mild, smaller gallstones, you could potentially sort of dissolve, cause those gallstones to dissolve, because when the concentration decreases, when the bag gets more dilute, then it means that the stones could potentially dissolve. And the smaller they are, the more likely they are to dissolve. Now, if you have these large stones, then they're not going to get dissolved, right? So just kind of think about these when you're planning your meals. Okay, don't fear naturally occurring fat. Don't choose fat free. Never choose fat free, because when they do fat free, they're replacing it with the fat with something, and oftentimes it's sugar. So it's like a double whammy with these fat free foods, right? And then of course limit your added sugar. So I hope you all found this helpful. Any questions, just place them in the comments, and if you know somebody who might benefit from this information, just share this video with them. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye.